Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Artensity. I'm going to be painting a picture of my friend Jenny today. Jenny's been my friend since middle school and she lives in Mississippi. So I don't get to see her often. Actually, I haven't seen her in years, come to think of it. We met in 8th grade and even then she had the most beautiful smile and the best laugh ever, and I'm just so sad to see that she has to hide her smile for the next few weeks. She posted this picture on Instagram and I was immediately captivated and had to ask her if I could paint it, and of course she obliged and I was so excited. So here we go. I am painting her skin tones. I'm using 2 different yellows over here in my Arteza palette, and I am diluting them with water in the tray provided on my tin, and I'm applying it to the areas on her face which are on the warmer side. I'm going to be adding some reds into the hair and into the shadows, and I'm also going to be kind of diluting it and mixing it in with the skin as well. Here I go on the left side, and I'm going to start rounding out some of the areas on her face so that they will have dimension. When you are painting or drawing, you want to create depth. You want things to look like they have shape to them or form. I'm also going to be adding some red tones in the hair right about now, and I'm preparing myself to make it a goldish reddish color later. When I am painting, I like to layer my colors, so I will add colors, let them sit for a minute like I did on the forehead, and then I'll kind of dilute it and take some of the color out. I'm trained in oil painting, so watercolors is something that I'm still working with every day. I just really enjoy the fluidity and the spontaneity of using it, where you can just leave areas alone and it just has this translucent glow about it, and it just leaves a very nice quality on the paper. So I'm darkening some areas. I'm adding some bluish tones. Blue is a great additive to skin tones, especially in the shadows. Blue is a cool color, and cool colors are really good at being used in lighter areas, on shadows on skin, because it makes it, because when you use black, it'll look too dark and too flat, and blue gives it a lot more vivacity, a lot more depth. I like to use blues and purples for my shadows, and maybe even some combination of browns. Alright, so I am starting to develop the shape of her face. I am adding some color under her eyes, some blue, and I'm going to start defining her eyes. She has some really pretty blue-green eyes that I really want to highlight. And adding some eyebrows, and I'm just using the edge of my brush, or like my brush is very flat, and so I'm just kind of holding it straight up and down to create some texture in her eyebrows. And the same thing, I'm holding my brush kind of straight up and using the very point to create the lines around the eyes. Alright, I have some brown left on my brush, and so I'm using it to create the shadow around her nose and to create a area with depth there to show that the nose is round. You don't want hard lines around your nose because your nose doesn't have any bones, it's cartilage, so you want a smooth transition there. I'm starting to define the lower lid with some of the diluted brown left on my brush. I'm going to outline the iris, and I'm using a darkened blue. I've darkened the blue with some of my dark brown, probably the burnt umber, and I'm going to start adding some blues, and then I'll add a little bit of yellow in there, yellow ochre, and it'll create a little bit of green flecks. So she'll have some golden and green flecks inside of her eye. I'm leaving a white spot in the eyeball so that I can have the white of the paper create a highlight on her eye. So the little area in the middle of the iris that I'm leaving, part of that is for the pupil, which I will paint really, really, really dark black, and then the white for the highlight. At the top of the iris, I'm making it darker to create the shadow from her eyelid. I have some dark paint left on my paintbrush, so I'm going to start outlining her mask. I never like paint to go to waste. So I'm diluting it with water because I will build up the darkness of her mask as I build up on the painting. Same with her pupils. Those will get darker after these dry, and it'll create more depth in there. When I paint, I work on the whole painting. I don't like to focus on one area at a time. That way it all looks like it's fluid, and it doesn't look like I've spent 5 hours on one eye and 1 hour on the other eye. So I'm still using some of that dark in my brush to find some of the areas, and I'm diluting some of the area with water and spreading the color around the eye. Sometimes I will puddle the water on there just with the intention of blotting it off, what I'm doing right there. And now I'm going to take a darker brown and start outlining the inside of the eye. On the corner of your eyes, you have the reddish pinkish tissue. I like to include that when it is getting some light. There will be a little reflection on there, and otherwise there will be some shadow on there, and that really helps to create the depth and add some color to the eye area. Here I'm adding some darker areas into the hair, and we're going to create some of that shape of her head using the shadows from her hair that's being casted on her face. Burnt umber and indigo blue are what I have mixed to create more of the shadow. And some Indian red on the right side. It's a little bit darker. It's less diluted than what I put on the left side. And I'm starting to create the strokes. You always want to remember to add water to your watercolors. You want that nice, soft, fluid look of the watercolor. I'm darkening the pupils of her eye again and building up layers. To define the side of her face here, I am using a Indian red and burnt umber mix, of course diluted with a little bit of indigo blue. There's a little bit of paint on my brush, so I'll be adding a little bit of water and spreading it around on my paper. I mostly paint on dry paper. Once in a while I will dab the paper with water and paint on top of that for a wet on wet technique, but mostly I use dry paper. I'm building up the layers on the right side of her face so that I can make her face look like it is round. I'm using the different color yellows to the right of the paper, and I'm adding a little bit of yellow to warm up some of the areas around her face, like the eyebrows. So when I'm making the skin tones, I use a combination of the oranges and yellows and browns with the little bit of blue, and once in a while I'll use a cadmium red for a pinkish look. That way your face doesn't look too yellow. So going around the face with the various light reds, the diluted reds, diluted browns and yellows, I'm building up the shape of her face and also adding the colors into her hair as I go, usually with whatever's left on my paintbrush. I'm going to start adding more and more color to the hair at this point. I am being intentional about where I'm putting the highlights and the dark tones. If I make it all one color, it will look very flat. So I'm layering the colors, I'm making areas more reddish yellow and reddish orange and yellow orange. Adding the darker areas, a third layer of the shadow underneath her hair that's casting onto her face to show that depth. Again, I'm using indigo blue and burnt umber. Then adding some water and kind of spreading it onto the face, going from dark to light, just like you would if you were shading with your pencil. And of course, blotting with my paper towel when I add some extra water to dilute. You want to go dark slowly. It's way easier to make an area darker than it is lighter, especially with watercolor. To create the folds in the face, you can add, I did a straight black here, and you'll also see that I'm painting around a strand of hair that is laying in front of her mask. When you are painting an area that is being covered by a fabric or something, you want to make sure that you're creating the lines to go with the shape of the form. No matter what you're painting, you always want to go with the shape of the form, actually. So you want to be sure you are creating these contour lines going the same direction as the face underneath to create that illusion. You are the artist. You dictate what people are going to see when they look at your painting or drawing or sculpture or dance. You are the artist. You dictate what people are going to feel. You dictate what they're going to think. To a certain extent. That's the beauty about art. When people start looking at your work and they think of it in a totally different way than what you intended. But if you wanted it to look round, by golly, it should look round. Again, I'm diluting the water and I'm creating this kind of atmospheric look about the mask. It's kind of eerie. I'm adding indigo blue in here with the black and also some burnt umber. I'm gonna let the color just dry and then I will add some more to it later. And just like I'm doing with the hair, I'm going back to the hair and adding some more highlights and lowlights and shadows. I want this strand of hair to kind of stand out, so I'm going to add some lighter colors so it sits right on top of that mask. And again, I'm blotting it to layer the colors. The focal point will be the eyes, so the hair is kind of secondary. I'm not really focusing on creating super detailed and fine hair, as well as the clothes. Keeping them simple, using a diluted black with some blue added to it. Here we are, we're going to add some more color to the eyes. Using some yellow and different color blues. I'm layering the colors in the eyes, making sure I get a cast shadow from the eyelid onto the eyeball, iris. And I am kind of curving my paint strokes because your eyeball is round and I want to create that illusion I want to help with that illusion as much as possible. Adding a little bit of depth around the eyes. You can also see from earlier how light that paint dried. It's another good reason to wait because you don't want to go too dark too fast. Like I said, always easier to make something darker than it is lighter. You always need to be careful when you're drawing and painting, especially eyes and especially beginner artists. You want to make sure you're drawing what you see and not what you think you see. Definitely need to look at a reference so that you're able to gauge what you're drawing to some point. Jenny has these little flecks of yellow in her eye like I previously mentioned, and I'm using that along with the blue to create some texture inside of the iris. That's what is great about people with lighter colored eyes. You can look right in them with the light on them and you can see all the undulations inside of their iris. It's really actually cool. Eyelashes, you want to be very careful. You don't want to overdo it. It's very easy to overdo eyelashes. And when you are painting the dark on top of the light, of course, you want to be very careful because once you get it on there, it's really hard to take off. Your eyeball is never white. You want to always make sure you use a cool color, a blue or a purple, to create that shadow on your eyeball. It makes it look a little more realistic. They're never going to be stark white. I'm adding some darker brown to define the eyebrows and using a white gel pen to add some highlights to her hair, some strands of her hair. And I chose blue as a background color because it is a complementary color to orange, and since her hair has a lot of orange in it, I thought it'd be a great contrast and also kind of balance out the blue in her eyes. I had so much fun painting Ginny. I hope everybody is staying safe, and I cannot wait to paint with you again. Thank you to all my new subscribers.